lens you look upon it, and that's why sometimes you're like literally physically forced to slow down. I can't really move around much.
You're realizing that now, right? And it's going to help you. I mean, 10 years, 20 years down the road.
How big of an impact has having kids, having a family had in terms of helping give that equilibrium and balance?
There was one moment in time when my kid was a baby, I would say a couple of months old, and I was in bed. He was on top of me. He was just lying there still asleep. That was the calmest I've ever felt in my life.
Going into 2025, how do you see media and content, for example, changing? Do you see certain patterns emerging or different trends coming up, or any changes with maybe AI coming into that more? Today we've got a blast of an episode. We've got John Aguilar, who's here from the Philippines. John has a huge background in media, runs essentially the Filipino version of Shark Tank and The Apprentice, which you're now bringing to the UAE and the Gulf region. You've also got a background in terms of from a decathlete, which is a mouthful. So today we really want to dive into some of your knowledge in terms of actually pitching businesses, being confident with that, some of your sporting backgrounds and some of your routines around that, and where media is going. So firstly, big thank you for your time today whilst you're in Dubai.
Great to be here, Charlie. Thanks for having me here.
First question I want to ask you is, what's the biggest mistake most people make when they're trying to pitch something or sell something to someone?
I think the biggest mistake when pitching something is that you're just thinking of yourself, right? Because when you're pitching something, it has to be a two-way street. So I feel like some people, they have an agenda. They want to be able to get something out of someone. And once that's your mentality, I think automatically it just sets you up for failure. I feel like, the best pitches are the ones that you're actually pitching something that is of benefit to the other person. So, it's a two-way street. And until you get to that point where what you're offering is actually of value to the other person, you're just pitching to a wall, I feel.
Do you see cultural differences between, say, for example, the Philippines, Europe, Middle East, and even the US? From like my own experience selling products online and over Zoom calls and whatever, I see big cultural differences in terms of, say, for example, how you can sell to the North American market versus the European market.
Right. Okay, definitely. In the East, in general, people a little bit more reserved, not so pushy. Right? I think in some territories, you can be a little bit more straightforward. In Asia, it's a little bit different. So I think the soft selling part of not really, ramming something down someone's throat is very important in Asia. Like in the Philippines, for example, we're used to, not really being sold at. It's very relational. I feel like, and this is, my experience here, in particular in Dubai, it's very easy here to be able to pitch anything to anyone just because of the openness, right? Because everyone here is from everywhere else, right? There's no true local in that sense. In some parts of the world, like Asia, it's very different. You have to maybe, if you have a certain family name, you belong to a certain clique, it's easier. And if you are of a different color or nationality, there's kind of a little bit of I would say a barrier, but it doesn't mean that you can't actually, sell something, right? It's just a little bit more difficult as opposed to if you share the same language. So things like that, the nuances of what is different, it kind of plays a factor.
One thing I think is interesting as well with what you're doing with the show, and I think, from my opinion, where social media and media is generally going, is I think people want a more immersive experience where they see not just like the front shiny bit that happens, but all the messy details in the background. And I think that's what's really like pulling people in more now, so they feel closer to the people they're watching.
Right. Yeah. I think vulnerability counts a lot. I think, and you mentioned the glamorization of entrepreneurship, right? Because, we're always so used to, just seeing the positives of what we're doing. Okay, I did this, I did that, but I think there's also a great appreciation for the struggles, because when you look at the struggles, you kind of assess a person or an entrepreneur based not just on their merits or what they're successful at, but you kind of, are given a very special sneak peek into, the kind of realizations that you will eventually, think about when you see that someone's not at their best, right? When someone's going through something, which usually all of us go through, right? You kind of also want to root for that person, right? I mean, you're in a rut. We understand. We've all been there, but to kind of go on that journey with that person and their business, I feel sometimes make for an even more compelling proposition, just because, without that struggle, without that hump, the success later on is, not as special, right? Because if you see someone, struggling, if you see someone going through these tough times, when they finally get their breakthrough or their big break, that's when you realize this is part and parcel of entrepreneurship. This is what it's all about. Everyone's going to fail. In fact, the biggest learning sometimes come from the failures. So I feel if you're able to successfully put it out there where it's not like also you're romanticizing, failure, right? So there's also such a thing as, being overly, melodramatic about these things and kind of milking, these moments for all it's worth. But I think if it's a balance of showing your vulnerability, expressing, your shortcomings, I think it really makes for, a very important redemption story that kind of sets you up for something really big. Because if people gravitate towards you because, they follow, the highs and lows, when you're at your high or at your highest, they're also the ones that are going to be cheering you on rabidly, just because they've felt you at your lowest, and now it's time to celebrate.
Quick interjection into the podcast. If you're an online coach who's looking to scale the business, get their first 5K month, 10K month, or even get to 50 to 100K a month, we have helped hundreds of trainers do this at this point, and I've personally generated over $14 million online in the fitness industry. We have a proven methodology that works, provided you're willing to do the work. Now, if you want to book in a free business audit, we'll break down exactly where you are now, where you want to go, and what's currently holding you back. Hit the link below this video and below the podcast to find out exactly how we can help you. Pick a time and we will walk you through the process of where your business is at and what exponential growth looks like. Now, back to the podcast. It's the hero's journey. It's like every movie has the same plot that
exactly
sort of goes through. And I think even, not that it relates back to my foot, but like when I broke my foot on Sunday, I put a post about, okay, this is what's happened, this isn't ideal, but these are the positives in the situation. Like, I've been procrastinating on writing a book. I have more time now because I can't work out as much. So I've done 20,000 words in 3 days.
Oh, there you go.
So like, that's a positive.
Yeah.
And then seeing the challenge and, okay, how can I gamify this process? Because what I do with most things in life. And it's like, how quickly can I heal this, and how quickly can I like document that on social media? I'm getting endless questions on Instagram about what you're doing, how you're fixing so fast, of like me putting videos of sitting in a hyperbaric chamber with oxygen masks and like just making it interesting. I think that's where people hide things that people want to see, because it might not seem exciting sexy to you, but it's so different from what other people are doing.
Right. You're talking about, having downtime, and that's when you kind of strung together the 20,000 words.
Yeah.
Let me just share to you, for my first book that I self-published way back when, maybe 2012. It was a self-published first book for me. My mother was in the hospital. She had lymphoma. So at that time she was in a really bad state. So I was in the hospital for a couple of nights on end, and that's when I really got to sit down and write the book. Was it on social media? No. I mean, no one knew about that. But it also allowed me, because of that time that I was just alone, and not even thinking of, all of this. It's sometimes, those moments, even for you internally, it's not even what you need to put out there on social media. It kind of gives you that centeredness of thought, and allows you to be able to think of things beyond what you're actually writing about. Some of my deepest realizations came from moments like that, where I just gave myself time. Maybe it was because of the circumstance. In that case, it was because I was, in a hospital room, alone with my thoughts. Sometimes it's those moments where you realize the bigger things that actually help you in whatever it is that you're doing that time. And I felt the same with you. I strung together a couple of dozen pages in one night. And because I was writing a book about building a house or building a home, it gave me the sense of, what's in store for me for the future. something maybe I wouldn't have readily thought about at that moment in time. So the richness sometimes of the realizations, the contemplation, the quality, because you're at a low moment, that cannot be replicated otherwise. So sometimes, an injury like that forces you to not work out, to feel like, you're not at your best. Sometimes that's the best thing that can happen to you.
Everything is the lens you look upon it, and that's why, even as you said that, I thought that sometimes you're like literally physically forced to slow down. I can't really move around much, and I think that's when you look at things in a different way. And it's even made, as you said, it really hit me then when you said that, because I'm in this situation physically right now, that you just change the way you look at things and think of things at a deeper level, which has actually been really nice for me the last few days, just to sit and slow down a lot.
It is. Sometimes it's refreshing, right? I mean, we're all constantly trying to optimize. We're always, how can I squeeze in a little bit more time to be able to do this or that, right? But when we're not at our optimal selves, when we're at sometimes even our lowest, it's also a different feeling. And I feel like sometimes we really need to be there in those moments where, we feel like we're just useless piece of shit. Right? Because when we're there, you're thinking, or at least the way you try to psych yourself up, right, to do the things that you need to do, when you're not there and you feel so low and you feel so, it grounds you, man. It really grounds you. And, for someone, for people like us, maybe, I don't know, type A, high achieving, when you're not achieving and, when you're just down and you feel so low and you realize, hey, life is not all about this, right? And it gives you time to also forgive yourself and not be too optimized. And sometimes it's a good feeling also. Like literally a couple of months back, I was super active. I had so many things going on. So I competed in the World Masters Athletics Championships in Sweden, in Gothenburg. So I had trained for that. So as you know, when you're training for a competition, sometimes that's really when your body's at its weakest as well. So I was training for that. I was jet lagged, had to come back to Manila, fly to Dubai to film an episode of the final pitch, fly back to Manila to film the finale. In a span of about 3 weeks, that all happened within that period of time. I'm telling you, after all of that, I literally was in bed. I got sick. I contracted pneumonia. I was out for 3 weeks. I'd never been out for 3 weeks. And so if you can just imagine...
Is it like bed bound?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I was in bed, backache. I mean, I was coughing constantly, couldn't speak. And imagine 3 weeks prior, I was at my physical peak, right? I was competing against the world's best former Olympians, European world champions, going head to head against them, competing in the international stage. And 3 weeks later, I'm just lying in bed, useless, and going to myself, oh my God, what just happened? So sometimes, and what that taught me is the value really of just rest, not doing anything. That's my mistake, because I was so up there all the time, right? For weeks on end, just at my best, right? And I had to be at my best. I had to be at my best in my physical, my physical mental faculties I had to be there. But because I was constantly there and there was no rest, there was no, because life shouldn't be all about that, right? You have to be able to get to a point where, okay, let's take things down, let's slow things down a bit, recover, reassess, so that we can go up again. But if you're constantly there, it's a recipe for disaster.
It's so ironic you say that, because the end of last week, I said to my girlfriend, I've had enough. I'm so burnt out. I'd had 2.5 weeks where Roy behind the podcast had seen, basically hated me, seen so much from me. I'd filmed 2 weeks with a videographer with me full time. I'd had a massive event, like the biggest fitness event they have here in Dubai, with 120 people there. I'm speaking on stage the whole time. I was just done. And then ironically, so I was like, okay, next week I'm gonna go to the Maldives. I was supposed to be in the Maldives now. And then I broke my foot 2-3 days later. So it's that whole thing, everything happens to a reason to force you to slow down. That really resonated with me when you said that. And that's one of the big things I'm trying to focus on in 2025 is slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So doing slightly less, but being very specific on what I'm doing and why, to move the needle on the right things, not just try and do everything and take loads of messy action, which is probably what I've done earlier on in my career to get to the point where I am now.
Right. And imagine yourself 10 years from now, man.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to feel it more. But then again, these realizations, you're realizing that now, right? And it's going to help you. I mean, 10 years, 20 years down the road. If anything, it's this kind of lived experience that really helps us, through the years, right? I mean, wisdom is born from, these things that happen to us, when we're doing all this. And, I feel like, and for me personally, I feel like the older I get, the more intimately I'm aware of the limitations of my body and my mind. And so, that's why I value the times when I just really, I'm just zoned out. I'm just at home. In fact, I rarely go out. I mean, you could see me last night I was at a networking event and I was, out in Abu Dhabi till wee hours of the morning. I do that for work. But, after that, I mean, there's no social life anymore, right? And I love that. I love the fact that I have the ability to be able to just tell myself, okay, this is too much. I just want to watch TV. I just want to stay in bed or just be with my kids. So that to me is, I think the value that, well, for me personally, entrepreneurship gives me, because I can control my time. I can control the kind of effort that I can put out and when, right? Because if you're working for yourself, I think you have the ability to be able to control your destiny in that sense. The hard part of working, giving that effort at a certain time, but then again, just releasing the foot off the gas and just knowing that, okay, this time it's cruise time, right? It's cruise time, which is equally important to the times when you're just going 100 miles an hour.
What I personally find is when you go 100 miles an hour and you try and force things, nothing happens. Whereas often, almost like the last few days, I've not really done a lot. I've been coming up with great ideas all over the place because I'm not really trying to do anything. And then thinking, oh, this would be a really good idea. You should make a video on this. You should do this. And I think it's where you try and force things from a business perspective. You can't necessarily force creativity to do something. It just comes to you, which is why you have the in the shower moment where you're conscious or subconscious mind almost relaxes.
Exactly.
And the idea pops into your head.
Yeah. Shower, sauna, it's all the same. It's when you're not thinking of anything, when you're consciously zoned out from, what you would normally be thinking about on a constant basis. I mean, we're all guilty of that, right? We all feel like, okay, what's the next thing, right? What's the next thing I need to do? What's the next thing that I need to think of? What's a good, maybe conceptual, creative execution that I can put out there or can consider? And I'm guilty of that all the time. That's when, I realize that also that, okay, it's too much already. And yeah, so, yeah.
How big of an impact has having kids, having a family had in terms of helping give that equilibrium or balance?
Okay, so you're not married?
No, I'm divorced and might get remarried in the future at some point.
No kids?
No.
Okay, all right. So let me share with you my, and this is, from a father's perspective, right? I'm telling you, man, there was one moment in time when my kid was a baby. I would say a couple of months old, and I was in bed. He was on top of me. He was just lying there, still asleep. That was the calmest I've ever felt in my life. It was like a Zen moment taken to the 10th level. I remember that time because I remember him just being there, still sleeping and just looking at, this human being that I birthed into the world with my wife. And I thought, this is the best part of my life. Nothing that I've done in business or in sports or any achievements that I've ever done or attained compares to just this moment of, this just baby sleeping on top of me. That was my most calm experience ever. And I remember to this day because, that's when I realized that is really what life is all about. I mean, I look at this human being and I'm going, okay, everything that I'm doing now and in the future will be of service to making sure that this child, has a better life or learns from or is inspired by the things that I do, because I am now in a position where the things that I will do in the future, I mean, regardless of how it impacts other people, the most important impact is the impact that it makes on this human being right here. And so it kind of puts everything in perspective, right? The decisions that I make, the things that I get into, is my child going to go in the future and say, my dad did something great. I think to me that's like the ultimate payoff, when you can have someone in the future, and this is way, 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 way in the future, be proud of you. I think that's really what life is all about. And believe me, I mean, I look at this human being, and now he's 10 years old. And I feel so proud that, everything he is way better than I ever was when I was his age. So I feel like, and this is obviously me being a father, being a dad, right? My son is better at me in every single possible way, right? And to me, him being an extension of me and someone who is essentially my legacy to this world that I leave, to be able to have something like that and a kind of relationship where, till this day, we are so close, and, to have that bond, that's just really, really, literally the best thing in the world. And he is, for all intents and purposes, my biggest achievement.
Would you want your son to be an entrepreneur?
Yes. And I think I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. I want him to be an entrepreneur because I feel like my son, and this is of course me being a biased father, right? I feel like my son is destined for great things. I don't know if it's projecting what I want for myself, projecting it to my son, because, I have no idea what he will become, right? But I feel like my son will be 10 times greater than what I could ever be, right? And I feel like entrepreneurship as a direction for one's life just has can create just so much impact in the world, right? The entrepreneurs are the ones that are, changing the way we do things, the way we perceive the world. There's just so much impact that one can make if you create something from nothing, especially if this something is of service to humanity. And if he chooses to go down that path, well, I'd be really happy. I do admit that, whenever we take him to the set, it's not bad that, he gets to see all of these other entrepreneurs on the show. His dad's the host of the final pitch. Like when I show him, I purposely kind of show him, this is what we do, brainwashing him, of course, slowly but surely. But I feel like, if he does become one, I will also do everything in my power to make sure that, he gets steered in the right direction, meaning that if he chooses the path, then, I will not sugarcoat anything for him. I will not overly glamorize, because he's seen the struggles. So if he does choose to go down that path, just to be true, honest with him and of what to expect, and let him make the mistakes that I made.
I think what is amazing is the law of exposure of what your son's been exposed to already. He can't be unexposed to that. Right. So his perspective of what's possible already is wild. And I think from my perspective, I'm not a father yet. I would like to be one soon. I personally think my goal would be to create the better version of me and try and make them have a better life than I've had more impact.
Right. I think it's normal. I think it's normal. Our children are the extension of ourselves, our species. And, when you want the best for your child, you also want the best for your legacy. Your child is your legacy, right? When you pass away, they will literally be, the next chapter of your life, right? The life that you have passed on to this earth. And so I think it's just normal for us to feel that way. But then again, I think the danger there is trying to expect too much, right? I think regardless where, they end up going or what they end up doing, I feel like the most important thing is really the support. It's them knowing that whatever they get into, even if, it's not the path that you wanted for them, it's a path that you will support and you will love them for unconditionally, no matter what.
I agree. I think one thing, I'm not sure if you think about this much, but I think about this a lot, is with media, podcast, video, YouTube, the reality that your son will be able to watch this conversation in 10 years' time is insane.
Yes.
And then your grandchildren will be able to watch this conversation is insane. And I think that is an amazing thing that people can do now with media, is document their life so the future generations can see their predecessors, so parents, grandparents, all those type of things.
Right. I mean, imagine you 50 years from now, you're not going to look like this, right? You're going to be grandpa, and, your grandchildren are going to look at you, man, grandpa looked so jacked that time. Yeah. And, I think it's cool, that we get to do this, right? We're living in a time, where we're able to document at such a voracious pace where, you leave nothing, you leave no stone unturned in terms of how you have shown up in this world, right? Just because it's out there, and assuming that it's genuinely who you are, it really is a recording of the kind of impact that you've made in this world.
Going into 2025, how do you see media and content, for example, changing? Do you see certain patterns emerging or different trends coming up, or any changes with maybe AI coming into that more?
Yeah, for sure. I think, I think that's a given. AI is going to be, there's all this talk about, the next AI content creators. And, I feel like because people are aware of that, there's also going to be a more genuine kind of longing for the way things were, right? And when I say the way things were, when everything is not as optimized or as perfect or not as, not as good, right? I think it will kind of force people to be able to sometimes just say no to, yes, the tools are there, but just because they're there doesn't mean you have to use them all the time, right? I mean, it's so prevalent now that, everything that sometimes we say, we get the tools, AI is working out our script, helping us with this or that. In a few years' time, you might not even be the person that's, on your page, right?
Be self-generated.
Exactly. So I think people are aware of that and are kind of, also wishing that, things don't go too far where the genuine person, the genuine thoughts are going to be replaced by an optimized version of who they feel, or who the algorithm or technology feels they should listen to or respond to, right? So I think there's going to be a resurgence of old school kind of, just, I don't even know if, and I think there are trends pointing towards people even just going back to watching TV, like old school TV, just because, sometimes you just want the mindless, okay, what's showing now?
Actually to see the adverts.
Exactly, right? I mean, isn't it crazy? It's like we're living in a time where we're so far advanced, but then again, we also want to be able to not be too fast, if that makes sense, right?
I think from my experience, everything seems to happen in a cyclical nature where even if you look on social media, for example, like video content's really popular, then Instagram carousels, images become popular again, and then it flips back almost like in a cycle where I try and take the contrarian approach to do the opposite of what other people do a lot of the time, and that seems to work, because if everyone's going right and then you go left, your stuff tends to stand out more.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a logic in that, especially if everyone's doing the exact same thing. Right. Excuse me.
To wrap things up, so we're coming into the new year, what would be your best mindset advice for any entrepreneurs who are going into next year? They want to try and really maximize what they do and maximize the output of themselves. What would be your short advice to them?
All right. Short advice going into the new year. Why don't you try this? Why don't you try to not do anything? Right? Why don't you try going into the new year without a plan? Why don't you try emptying your mind instead of doing that, okay, this is my bucket list or this is my New Year's resolution? Why don't you humor yourself and not do that? Don't set yourself up for any expectations for what you want to achieve or do for the year, right? Make that kind of like your, I don't know, because early part of this year I did a dry January, which turned up, to be a long-term thing. So I think because I'm talking to this audience where obviously, I don't know, like gym bros or entrepreneurs or, longevity or tech geeks, always are looking at that, right? First thing the year. Why don't you just forget about that? You might surprise yourself because, and I think this is relevant to kind of the narrative that we've explored in this podcast, it might actually be good for you. It might be good to actually maybe not come up with a plan and just open yourself up to, the coincidences, the accidents of the universe. I think that's probably a good way to kind of experiment on how to start the year. And you'll never know, because when you come up with a list or when you come up with a plan, that's still all just you, right? Why don't you let the universe kind of come to you and come up with something for you? I don't know. I just thought about that now, but it might be, a good thing to consider.
It's interesting because that's almost similar to what I'm doing this year, very opposite to everything else I've done before, which is like massive list of goals, really specific financial goals where I'm like, I know what I need to do, just fucking don't really just go, just keep going. And I think sometimes as entrepreneurs, we create so much stress and almost friction by creating this rigid framework of I have to do these things that you don't just almost be in flow state and just go with it, and then you would actually end up just getting better results anyway. Right.
So yeah, I think to that point, right? Flow is good, right? But sometimes you have to break the flow, right? Just break it, right? Because you'll never know. The serendipity of just something coming to you because another force out there has brought it to you. It's because you left yourself open to new ideas, because you weren't actually creating or trying to figure something out for yourself. Just being open to the universe in that sense of it coming to you instead of you seeking it out or you building it. I think there's a logic in that as well. So I don't know, it may be the first couple of weeks, it may be the first month, but to just give yourself that time and kind of excuse to not get into that usual state that you would normally be in at the start of the year. So I don't know, those are just my thoughts. Might be good to kind of experiment on and try out.
Contrarian thinking, opposite.
Exactly.
Big thank you for your time, John. Where's the best place for people to find out more about you, the shows, and everything you're doing?
Yeah, so our show is The Final Pitch. Done a lot of seasons of that in the Philippines. We're taking it to the GCC. So Dubai is going to be our first entry point. It's going to be by next year. We're going to make the announcements of who the judges will be, the partners, by Q1 of 2025. So you can also find me on Instagram, John S. Aguilar. And LinkedIn also. I mean, most of the people who reach out to me do so on LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn as well, John Aguilar.
Awesome. Big thank you for your time, John. Everyone took a ton of value from that. Make sure you like this. Make sure you give it a share around. And big thank you for your time. That was awesome.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, dude. That was great. Really, really good. Thank you.